Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's Mission Critical Insights discussion on the future of critical infrastructure, resilience, cybersecurity, and innovation. I'm Joyce Hunter, former Deputy CIO for Policy and Planning at the USDA and interim CIO, and the founder of Data Science Camp, with a career spanning digital information, cybersecurity, open data, workforce development, and public-private integration and operations across government, academia, and industry. I currently serve as the Executive Director for Collaboration, Education, and Research at Mission Critical, a cybersecurity and critical infrastructure think tank focused on advancing resilience, operational security, innovation, workforce readiness, and cross-sector collaboration across some of our nation's most critical and essential infrastructure sectors. Today, we are honored, very honored, to have Tony Scott, who is one of our nation's foremost technology and cybersecurity leaders, for an important conversation on the evolving challenges and opportunities facing critical infrastructure security in America. Tony currently serves as the president and CEO of Intrusion Inc. and previously served as the federal chief information officer under President Obama, where he oversaw more than $85 billion in federal IT investments and led the government-wide cybersecurity response following the OPM breach. His distinguished career includes executive leadership roles as CIO at VMware, Microsoft, and the Walt Disney Corporation, as well as CTO at General Motors. Tony is widely recognized for his expertise in cybersecurity, digital transformation, AI, cloud adoption, and technology modernization, and is a member of the CIO Hall of Fame. Tony, one of the themes that consistently emerges in conversations around critical infrastructure is interdependency. Energy receives a significant national attention, but another foundational resource quietly underpins every sector of our economy and society. As AI, cloud computing, manufacturing, agriculture, and data centers continue to scale, the resilience of water infrastructure becomes increasingly critical. Yet many experts argue that water systems remain among the most undersourced and vulnerable components of national infrastructure. For our second conversation, we want to shift our focus from energy to water and explore the growing cybersecurity, operational, and resilience challenges facing water infrastructure across the United States. Tony, water infrastructure rarely receives the same level of national attention as energy or defense, yet nearly every sector depends on it. I think the statistics are the average person can go maybe 3 days without water. How serious is a cybersecurity and resilience challenge facing U.S. water systems today?
Well, I think it's a great area for exploration, Joyce. There's a couple of things that come to mind. First, obviously, we're very dependent on weather patterns to, for it to rain to produce the water in reservoirs and rivers and lakes and so on. So, right at the beginning, understanding what weather patterns are happening or gonna happen is, I think in some ways where it all starts, because if you know what's going to happen, you can plan for it and do responsible things. In California, where I lived for a long time, the state there was heavily criticized for releasing water out of dams prematurely when it was obvious that the rainfall that was coming wasn't going to be probably adequate to keep some of the reservoirs full. And, with AI and other technology, we can hope to do a better job of forecasting and even managing things like, the weather and how we handle the supply. But you can imagine disrupting that with a cyber attack. The weather forecasting systems or the systems that manage the flow of water from reservoirs or from rivers or other containment facilities, that could be very disruptive, and drain critical resources right at a point when they're most important. Similarly, in a lot of the places around the US where we have military facilities or other critical um, uh, entities that make up our national defense, they're very dependent on local water systems, it turns out. Um, and some of those were water systems that were constructed, in fact, most of them were constructed around the same time that the military bases were put in, which was World War II, kind of era sorts of things. And in many cases, haven't been modernized since then. So you can probably infer from that the challenge that we might have. But almost all of it was connected to the internet at some point, post 2000. So we have old infrastructure connected to the internet, which is creating a highway for the bad guys to come and attack us. So it
Mm.
seems like we probably need to do a lot more to protect that critical infrastructure. At Intrusion, we're engaged in a project to protect water wells. In there's in a very distributed environment where there's a lot of unmanned water wells, very near a U.S. military base, and if you shut down those water wells, you effectively have shut down the capabilities of the U.S. government at that military base.
Mm.
But the same could be said for water supply for hospitals, for water supplies that are necessary for data centers, water supplies that are necessary for nuclear power plants, and so on and so on. And so, to the extent that all of those might have vulnerabilities and are connected to the internet in some fashion or another, um, is cause for examination.
And cause for concern. I just returned. My grandson graduated from Paris Island this past weekend, and looking at some of the infrastructure things that they are talking about trying to modernize. I think the last time a lot of those systems out there, and if you've ever been to Paris Island, it's in the middle of nowhere,
That's right.
and if you look at the last time they were modernized, it was probably in the 40s or the 50s, maybe. Um, but that's another topic for another day. But as you said, they operate at local and regional levels with limited budgets and staffing. So, of course, this fragmentation creates unique cybersecurity and operational resilience challenges. So, what can we do about that? I mean, these are small, local, usually private owned organizations. How do we get them to see, understand, and recognize uh, why is it important and why should we care?
Well, I think there's a couple of points I'd make here, Joyce, in answer to your question. There is some beauty in diversity in that these tend to be very local. They were built one at a time, often using similar technologies, but not always the same technology. Um, and they were built over, multiple decades, let's put it that way,
Mhm.
using whatever was, you know, considered to be state of art at that particular time.
Yeah.
So the good news about that is there's a diversity in that population of technologies and systems and the way things were built and so on, which make it difficult for an adversary to create one um, uh, cyber threat, if you will, or cyber active element that would take them all out at once.
Mm.
That's the good news. The bad news is all of these could be very, very vulnerable. Um, and and put a finer point on see going on today is a lot of surveillance of inventory gathering. What are the systems? What are the vulnerabilities? what are the critical points that could be attacked in the event, an adversary wants to engage in activity. And with that inventory, they can create a playbook that if and when they decide they want to attack, all they have to do is go activate it. So to more directly answer your question, I think we need to have a inventory of what we've got, situational awareness around um, how how far behind we are in terms of modernizing some of these systems and getting to a standard that we feel comfortable with in terms of our ability to be resilient and deflect and defend against the kinds of attacks that we know our adversaries are capable of. And that needs to be done on an individual, facility by facility, critical infrastructure element basis. And once you've done that, then you can roadmap what you need to do to get better.
We've seen a rise in ransomware and disruption-focused attacks targeting water utilities. And you mentioned before in our last segment on energy, why it's becoming more attractive to cyber criminals and less sophisticated threat actors. Low maturity, public impact. There is no place anywhere that you can do without water. It doesn't matter whether it's healthcare, whether it's agriculture, whether it's it doesn't mean you need water. Easier access, psychological leverage, as you were talking about before. So what can government, industry, and private sector do to collectively improve resilience before we experience a truly large-scale or coordinated water sector incident?
Well, I think it starts with something I mentioned before, which is uh, take a inventory of where you're at. Know know your uh, from a situational awareness perspective, what you have in terms of equipment, systems, facilities, processes, people, skills, and so on. And then once you have that, then you can start to have a conversation with governance authorities, with state and local authorities, federal authorities, and so on, to help map out how do we get from point A to point B to point C to where we want to be. Because it's not going to get done overnight, but you have to be thinking about this over a period of time. My late wife was a city manager, and they were always, I think, rightfully focused on what is the multi-year plan for our city? What are the things that we need to do that improve our situation over, a multi-year period? What investments do we do each year that further that cause? And among those were always, water for the city. A city is greatly dependent on water, not only water for drinking, but also storm water. How do we get rid of the stuff effectively so that we don't have, landslides or disruptions to daily life? And so that, every couple of years assessment of what do we have, what are our vulnerabilities, and what is it going to take to fix them is a mental exercise that I think these organizations need to make sure they're squarely focused on. And as I said, I think to you before, the attitude that if it's not broken, everything's fine is really what gets you in trouble in these critical areas.
Maybe we should have the same type of tabletop exercises for water that we do for any other cybersecurity incident.
Well, I think that's the right answer. even when I was the CIO at Disney, we worried about our theme parks and some major catastrophe happening that would effectively shut down the guest experience at the
Mm,
park. You could think of those as things like, the water is bad for some reason, no matter what the cause. The electricity goes out for some reason. There's a weather event for some reason. There's God forbid, an airplane crash, or explosion of some kind. And you have to sort of think through all of those scenarios and be prepared, not only on paper, but I think, have the physical exercise simulating what would we do if this happened, or what would we do if that happened. And when you do that on a regular basis, you actually get better, even though the likelihood of any of those things happen is relatively small. The act of going through the exercise in a very physical way tells you a lot about your leadership skills, your preparedness, your ability to respond in the right way when inevitably something happens. It might not be exactly the thing that you practiced, but you have practiced at least. And I'll end this comment by saying one of the great questions I was uh, asked one time is, how do great performers get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. Um, and my answer to how do you succeed when these kinds of challenges come along? Practice, practice, practice. The
mhm.
idea that you're going to perform really well without any kind of practice, I think, is, sort of self-obvious.
Remember Y2K?
Yes.
I was with Lawson Software at the time, and we were working with the big six at the time, and we were working with the consulting firms and the healthcare organizations, and everybody was moaning and groaning and complaining about the preparedness for Y2K, and the comment after it came and went, and nothing happened. The comment was, "Well, why do we do all of this? Nothing happened." Right?
Yeah, that was the whole point.
Exactly. And that's the same thing here,
Yeah,
right?
yeah. No, I agree with you. And it's when nothing happened, that's a great outcome, and a testimony to great planning and so on, especially when you know something is coming ahead of time. Now, in a lot
Yes.
of cases, we don't know ahead of time. In
Mhm.
in that case, we knew there was something that was likely to happen. But I think it makes the point, great preparedness keeps a lot of bad stuff from actually occurring.
Right. Exactly. So you've had all these successful leadership roles, VMware, Microsoft, Disney. Now that must have been the most challenging, keeping that place the most happiest place in the world, 24/7, 365 days a year, and the federal CIO. Looking at energy and water, what concerns you most? I know I asked this question the last time. I'm going to ask it again. What concerns you most about the future of the totality of critical infrastructure security? And then what gives you the most optimism?
Well, I think from a concern standpoint, it's probably the um, dealing with all the distractions that go on in daily life that keep us from focusing on these really important um, things that sustain life and, help our economy and grow our quality of life. If you're worried about uh, all kinds of other things and not focusing on these really critical infrastructure things, or at least somebody is not focused on those things, that's what I worry about. There's a there's a um, and I don't want this to be interpreted the wrong way, but there's a short attention span, it feels
Oh,
like, uh, today
yes.
in society, where instant gratification and um, you know uh, focus on the latest hit song or dance move or food or whatever meme of the day is, gets everybody all sort of wrapped up. But I'm not seeing a lot of TikTok, um, uh, messages or tweets or, you know, uh, things on X or Reddit or wherever you pay attention digitally to what's going on, that's focused on these sort of critical infrastructure issues, whether it's water or energy or anything else. And I think somehow, and I hate to say this, it's going to take a crisis of some kind
Ugh.
to refocus us on this very important area. And uh, and so I worry about the distractions, that prevent us from dealing with some of these real important issues. That's my fear, if you will, or concern going forward. On the other
Yes.
hand, I think we have better tools than we've ever had to deal with some of this. When you think about, the compute power that we have, the advances in education and our ability with material science and all kinds of other things, we're better positioned than we've ever been in history to actually do something and solve some of these sort of long-standing sorts of challenges that we know are coming. We know we've got climate
Hmm.
things that are going to affect us. We have food supply issues. We have energy uh, issues, energy distribution issues, and so on. But we also have great tools. And I think we've got to be focused on using those to, solve some of these problems. So that's my hope for the future. Um, and I think we can't be focused enough on that at this particular point.
Now, I want to throw in one more question for you. Workforce.
Mhm.
Um, how do you envision the future of the workforce, the technology workforce, and other types of workforce? I'm a strong believer. I'm a humanities major, so I'm a strong believer that
Sure.
humanities majors make really good analysts. But if you look at workforce, how are you or how is Intrusion um, addressing the workforce shortage?
Well, I think, we haven't solved the problem. I'll admit to that right now. But I think the broader solve for this is um, lies in a couple of areas. One is making sure that we prepare young people who are just coming through the education system and are beginning their life experiences as adults, are as best prepared as they can be for the future that awaits them. And I think that includes technology skills. It's beyond knowing how to operate an iPhone or a tablet or, the set-top box or the gaming system that, might be popular at the moment. It's not only how to use the technology, but also ethical considerations around how technology is used. Um, and I think more and more it's going to be um, uh, around the decisions that we make about how and when and where we use the tools that we have at our disposal, that's going to make a difference. Um, and so I would focus on that to start with. Uh, the future is the young people that are just coming through the system today. It's not the old geezers like me, at this particular point. Um, so I would start there, and then I think also we also probably need to address one of the side effects that's happened as a result of the broad use of the internet everywhere, which is how do you solve the people climbing into their own little
Mm,
foxhole and
mm,
only consuming
yeah.
information that is highly tailored to whatever their specific interests are? I worry about that a lot, because that containerization of perspective and containerization of viewpoint and so on ultimately is a dangerous thing, the silo um,
Mhm.
uh, problem. So, and I don't have a great answer for that, to be honest with you, but I do think that's a imminent danger the more and more and more that happens. And I think others are going to have to figure out, how to address that. But um, with the right tools and the right sharing of information across broad communities, collaboration, I think there's a solve to any and all of these problems at some point.
Yeah, and I believe that, but particularly with the young people, elementary school starting all over again, and talking about creative and critical thinking, they shouldn't be taught to take just to take a test. That's not creative or critical thinking. Um,
Right.
I often ask them when they ask me a question in my camp. I turn it around and ask them, "Well, what do you think?" And you'd be surprised at some of the
That's right.
blank stares that I get because they don't
Yeah,
think.
yeah, yeah. Or haven't been taught that that's a important thing to do, right?
Yeah.
It's
Yes. Yes.
when I was
Absolutely.
growing up, my next door neighbor was an engineer for Motorola, and I grew up in the suburb of Chicago called Oak Park, where the houses all had these lovely front porches. And in the summertime, we'd all sit on the front porch, and my neighbor would invite all the kids over to play these logic games that he'd constructed in his lab at Motorola.
Mm.
And they were always a series of little switches and lights. And if you did the right sequence, you'd get a green light. And if you did the wrong sequence, you'd get a buzzer. And he had a whole plethora of games that were centered around these boxes of switches. So it could be, you've got a, a fox, a chicken, some grain, a sack of grain, a canoe, and a person, and only two can go in the canoe at one time, and you got to get them all to the other side of the river, right? Simple logic puzzle. Um, and we were entertained for hours by solving
Yeah.
these puzzles. That was
Yeah.
just one of them. But it taught you thinking and logic, and to think more about what happens next after the next thing that I do, what the consequences of
Right.
things are. And
Yeah. Hmm.
and I always thought, that was among the most valuable things I ever learned. And it didn't come from school. It came from, and I went to good schools, but it
Hmm.
was, just a different kind of experience that I wish more people had had, the opportunity to have those kinds of experiences.
The value of outside playing.
Yeah, yeah.
So thank you so much, Tony. As we close today's conversation, I want to again thank Tony Scott for sharing his extraordinary insights, leadership experiences, and perspectives on the evolving challenges facing our nation's critical infrastructure. From energy and water resilience to cybersecurity, AI, and operational modernization, today's discussion reminds us that protecting the critical infrastructure is simply not a technology issue, it's a national security, economic stability, and public trust initiative. This future will require building stronger collaboration, across government, industry, academia, and communities to build resilience, secure, and adaptive systems capable of supporting the next generation of innovation and growth. At Mission Critical, we believe the future of national resilience depends on the ability of government, industry, academia, and communities to work together to address emerging threats, modernize infrastructure, strengthen workforce capabilities, and responsibly leverage technologies like AI, cloud, and data analytics. Thank you to our audience for joining us, and we look forward to continuing these important conversations. If you want to reach out, you can reach Intrusion at www.intrusion.com. And for Mission Critical, it's www.mission-critical.org. Until next time, stay informed, stay resilient, and live long and prosper.